Welcome everyone. We started this webinar series in August with talking about agency remuneration, and we're going to finish it today talking about agency remuneration. So we've gone the full circle. And so to kick that off, let's start by actually talking about what is incentive-based remuneration. So we're going to talk about the benefits of it, defining performance, and that's quite a challenge for many people, and then developing criteria around this idea of soft, medium and hard metrics, and then explore some of the methods of our PBR, which was performance-based remuneration. It was also called payment by result, but now the latest trend is to call it incentive-based remuneration. And then I want to take you through the 5 big challenges that are confronted by both marketers and their agencies to overcome when you move into an incentive-based model. And then finally, I'm going to take you through what we consider is the ultimate incentive model for your agencies, and obviously answer any questions at the end. Finally, I just want to review the past webinars, but we will be finished with that in under an hour. So why would you look at incentive-based remuneration? Why would you look at performance? And I think a lot of the interest in this area is because of the frustration many marketers feel and some agencies feel with the current remuneration models. The current models are fairly much based on compensating the agency for the cost of the resources they're providing. And in doing that, paying it either by retainers or hourly rates or project fees, people are feeling that there is no commitment or skin in the game from the agencies in actually driving performance. What they're really doing is just providing a service. So the first benefit is to actually give incentive to improve agency performance with incentives for achieving results. And what that means is actually getting the agencies not focused on the number of hours it takes to do something, but focused on how effective the outputs and outcomes are in delivering the marketer's requirements or objectives. Next, it rewards the agencies more, hopefully, for outcomes and less for inputs. Because what we're actually seeing is agencies are looking for ways of maximising their share of budget by increasing the inputs into the process. Whereas what we should really be looking at is incentivising people to deliver the outcomes that are required. After all, you have to ask yourself, why are you doing this if it's not to achieve something? And if the idea of achieving something is just the number of head hours that sits on an invoice, then it's not a very good achievement, is it? And then finally, to encourage competition, but not competition between agencies, but competition to achieve the goal and not just compete over your budget. I'm sure many marketers are sitting there and they've got multiple agencies that are competing with each other, but they're competing for the share of budget and not competing for helping to make your brand or your business as successful as possible. And that's where incentive-based compensation or remuneration works really well in trying to shift the focus away from the cost of doing business into the return on that investment by giving the agency skin in the game. So the first thing I'd say to people is, if you're considering incentives, then you have to ask yourself, what are you incentivizing the agency for? If you're going to have a relationship with a supplier where you just want them to do what you tell them to, then there's really no incentive in that. The next issue that you're confronted with is, what criteria do you actually want to base this around? What is your idea of performance? And let's start on the right here with agency performance, because this is where people either default to or they start at. And what it's about is incentivizing the agency or supplier to do their job as well as possible, which seems ironic to me, but the idea of actually incentivizing people to do their job, when in actual fact their job should be very well defined, and that's around the services delivered, how well they manage the relationship, what are their functional competencies, do they do media or creative or social media well, what's their contribution to branding or the brand, how well do they project manage, do they have good administration, do they deliver cost efficiency, are they proactive, will they collaborate with others or even coordinate with others? And so agency performance is a hygiene factor in these relationships. What you're actually doing here is just paying the agency to do their job well. So if we then move into the middle, this is where we have very specific marketing objectives. And what we want to do is move the agency's focus away from just how well they do their job to what is their contribution to achieving these marketing objectives. So it could be, in the case of advertising, brand awareness, or brand image shifts, or attitudinal ratings, ad enjoyment, brand personality, propensity to buy, ad scores, persuasion indexes, and there's many different marketing metrics that could be used here. And so it's the first step away from the agency looking inwards to looking outwards to what would be their contribution to the overall outcomes that are being addressed. Now, that's a major step forward from the very inward-looking view of agency performance to what is the overall marketing performance. But I think because of the involvement of finance and procurement, and also because of this idea of return on investment, what we're seeing is a trend to the next step, which is moving to the left, which is business performance. And the idea or recognition that marketing and advertising have a significant impact on business performance, or at least a significant contribution on business performance. And so if I'm going to be, as an organisation, paying a financial benefit or incentive to my agency suppliers for their contribution, then perhaps my measurements should be more financially based, such as sales volume, volume growth, share of market, relative brand performance, composite performance of many different metrics, market brand share, customer loyalty, brand equity, brand profitability. And so this is about making a link between the financial impact that the agency and marketing department's contribution has on the overall business to the incentive that is then paid or shared with the agencies that make a contribution to this. What types of incentive-based or performance-based remuneration are there? And these are the main ones that we see in the marketplace. The first one is a true bonus, and that is you already agree your fee and your overhead and profit margin with the agency, and this is additional to that for achieving above expected performance. So the starting point here would be, here's a realistic expectation of what we want to achieve, and anything above that would come with a bonus payment above and beyond the profit margin you're already making. The next one, and to me that is a true incentive. The next one is more about getting the agency to put some skin in the game, and that's called cost recovery. So in other words, you work out the fee that you would pay the agency for their work, you take away all of the profit, and in fact in some cases we've seen all of the profit and the overhead, and then structured this so that the agency can recover the cost and profit through the performance that they deliver. And that's a significant skin in the game, and it has significant downside to the agency, therefore should also have a significant upside for the agency, and that is going beyond the profit margin that they would already have expected under the first model. So, and I think that's the number one issue. Kathy, you've asked what type is considered best practice. Look, let me get through the list here, and then I'll go back to that. Shared risk and reward is where the agency puts a percentage of their margin, and typically it's 5 or 10%, for an opportunity to earn a contribution, that back plus a contribution from their client. And this has been very popular, but it's been the biggest failure, the biggest failure. And that's because it doesn't act as an incentive. The agency puts up 5%, the client puts up 5%, the agency at best could earn 10%. Now, why would an agency put up 5% only to earn 10%? Well, this works much better if they put up 5% for the chance to earn, say, 10 or 15 or 20% if the results are achieved. And the other area, the fourth one, is earn back, where the agency puts a percentage of margin at risk to be paid in results only. And in fact, we've had now 2 examples, they were both in the direct response area, where the agency put up 100% of their fee and converted that to be paid on results. So what they did was they gave up 100% of their fee and got paid a pre-agreed fee per sale. And in fact, what it did was increase the number of sales, increase conversion rate, and the agency ended up 2.5 times more than they were earning under the old model that they had. Now, as far as what's best practice, the issue is not which of these models, but how you actually structure them. Most agencies are happy with the first one, the bonus, because they have no skin in the game. And as you go down, there's greater skin in the game, and so they're less likely to want to participate. The best practice comes when you're actually able to use the model to give the agency a big incentive, because that's why it's called incentive-based remuneration, but also they have a good opportunity to be able to impact on that and achieve it, because then you will get a huge amount of input from the agency in delivering it. So I'll move on to the 5 big challenges that every marketer is actually faced with when going down this path. And here's the first one. The agencies are hesitant to link compensation to performance. And the reason for this is because they'll often say that we can't control many of the factors that impact on performance. And this is particularly so when we move away from agency performance to business or marketing performance. They'll say, well, we can't control this, this and this. And here's the point. If we're talking about the beverages category, the 2 biggest influences of sales in the beverages category are, the first one is the weather, and the second one is distribution. When the weather's hot, sales of cold beverages go up. When the weather's cold, sales drop. Now, the only person that can impact that and actually control it is the person shown on the screen at the moment. So if anyone can show me who can control marketing outcomes, I'll be very happy to be introduced to God, because that's the only person that has any control in this whole process. In actual fact, all of us, from the CEO of the company, the CFO, down to the CMO, down to the lowliest brand manager, and everyone in the agency is merely making a contribution to the possible outcome. No one is actually controlling it. And so any agency that says, well, we can't control everything, I think you have to say to yourself that they probably don't feel that they have any impact or make any contribution to the overall result, which is why they're not willing to move forward to have skin in the game. The next one, the next big challenge, is the performance criteria prove difficult to agree on. And this is because there is a misalignment of the overall expectations of both parties. And we did some work with a food company who wanted to go down this incentive path, and they only wanted to have 2 metrics, one of them being market share not volume, but the other was volume growth, and they had a company objective of 11%. Now, when we asked the company when was the last time they achieved the 11% growth, the fact was that they'd never achieved 11% growth. They had it as an objective, and they wanted to use that as the measure of giving the agency an incentive where the agency would be paid if they achieved it. They were asking the agency to give up their profit margin for the chance to earn 50% on top of that profit margin if they achieved 11% growth or better. But why would the agency do that if they'd never achieved 11% in the past 5 years? This is where you need to be realistic in the way that you align or agree your performance criteria. What there should be is a realistic objective, and then you can certainly have stretch objectives. In this case, what we did was we averaged the volume growth for the past 5 years, and it came in at just under 5%. And what we said there is, at this point, the agency would earn back the profit that they'd given up. Above and beyond that, they would get incremental increases in their profit margin up to 11%, which was capped as well. so it meant that to achieve the stretch objective of 11%, you would be able to, to achieve that, the agency would be paid a significant bonus on top. The next challenge is the fact that the incentives are often too small to actually be an incentive. And in fact, we had one situation where a client had us involved in measuring the incentives, the performance, and calculating the incentive, and the agency ended up getting paid less than $50,000. Now, as the CEO of the agency said to me, $50,000, I can pretty much make that as pure margin on almost any major production job going through with this client. I mean, $50,000 is not a lot of money. And the reason I think this happens is that too often people look at incentive-based remuneration as from an advertiser's point of view, as a cost-cutting exercise. It's purely seen as a way to reduce the fee paid to the agency, which is just ridiculous, because you should have already negotiated a fee that you're happy with. The idea of an incentive is to go above and beyond that, but to pay it when you get increased value to the company that has been contributed to by the agencies. And so, this is one of the areas that if you sit down and talk about an incentive-based compensation model, and the incentive that you're willing to pay is so small that it's not worth it, then I would say to you, walk away. Do not waste any more time going down this path, okay? Because you have to remember, it has to be an incentive. It can't just be a way of taking money away from the agency, because what you will do is destroy any incentive for the agency to do anything other than try and find other ways of making money out of it. The next big challenge, and this is particularly for the marketers and their organisations, is how do I budget for this bonus payment? Because of course, if the maximum bonus that you're going to pay, let's say it's a significant amount of money, like millions of dollars, and you don't achieve that, then the marketers are concerned that it's going to be taken away from them, or it's money sitting there that they've had to allocate to paying a bonus that may never be needed. Well, the CFO doesn't mind that, because if you underperform as the marketing team, they would be very happy having a couple of $1 million delivered to the bottom line. So the CFO doesn't have a problem with it. The marketers do have a problem with it. And so there's a couple of things that we've done in the past. The first is having the pool of the bonus actually funded out of costs of goods sold. So in actual fact, it's not part of your budget, it's actually aligned to being funded out of what's allocated as cost of goods sold for the year. The other way of doing it is, as you get to the end of the year, to actually calculate what it would be and then budget it to be paid in the next year. And while some people say under SOX compliance, that's not allowed to incur a cost that you don't pay in that year, I think you'll find under accrual accounting that that's perfectly legitimate, but check with your CFO. But it's another way that you can actually do it. If you're going to go down the path of having incentives, you're going to have to find a way of funding them. If you can't fund it, then don't do it. And the next and final big challenge is disputes over the payment of the incentive. And in fact, we had a major telco who had an incentive scheme with their agencies based on the launch of mobile phones. And in fact, the agencies were going to be paid an amount per phone sold. Now, in actual fact, it was a terrific deal, and it was completely worthy of being used, because the media agency and creative agency and digital agency were very, very focused on maximising the opportunity for that telco to achieve the highest share of market. And there were KPIs and measures in place. The campaign went absolute gangbusters. It exceeded all expectations. The sad part is that the marketers then reneged on the payment. And the reason they reneged was because they said that the product itself actually exceeded expectations, and that they felt the contribution of their agencies had little to do with achieving these results. Now, it doesn't cut both ways, people. If you make an agreement and you want to maintain trust between you and your agencies, then you have to pay the fee. But to turn around and say, well, you know, we did this deal, but we're really not sure whether you contributed to it, it's a bit late. And so all you've done is destroyed the faith of the agencies to actually want to work harder for you. I mean, of course they'll keep working for you because you're a source of revenue, but don't ever try and go back and actually then engage them in another deal like this. And yet, what I want to do is take you through a case study now of what we believe is the ultimate incentive system. The URL you see on the screen there, if you go there, you'll see there's a blog post from June this year, which takes you through more details on each of those challenges and how to overcome them. But let's move on to the ultimate incentive scheme. So the first thing you need to do is to think of the incentive scheme not on a single agency basis, but choose the agencies and suppliers that really do make a strategic or performance contribution to the results that you're measuring. So it could be that you want to use a media agency or a digital media agency and maybe a market researcher, or you may want to use an event company. I don't care who they are, as long as they are the ones that are contributing to the major strategic driver that contributes to the major outcome. Around the edge there is just a whole lot of suppliers that are doing their job and you want them to do it well. But incentive is about incentivizing the people that can actually increase the performance of marketing and the organisation. So the first thing to do is identify who they are, and I'd recommend at most it would be 3 or 4. It might be 2 or 3, it might be 1. But if you have a number of different agencies working together and they're all helping you drive a strategic outcome, then they should be the ones that are brought together around the table. Because what you're actually going to do is use this incentive system to chain them together and focus them on delivering for you a particular outcome. Now, what should that outcome be? We've found that you can go round and round in circles choosing what the particular criteria should be. But the most successful example we have of an incentive system was that I turned to the CMO and I said, what are your KPIs for performance? And he was able to list off 6, 7 different KPIs. Some of them were internal HR issues around staff retention and the like, and what we're able to do is we took those out. But what was left were KPIs that the marketing department owned around volume, market share, brand desirability and the like. And what we did was we shared those with all 3 agencies that he had in his strategic team. That was a creative agency, a media agency, and a social media agency. So had the thrill, PR company actually, they were PR but focused on social media. So we had those 3 agencies all focused on the same criteria. Now, the mistake people have made in the past is they'll have 3 agencies, but they'll have 3 lots of criteria for each agency. And so what you're doing is incentivizing the agencies to work to deliver their particular criteria, which in some cases could be counter to what the other agencies are trying to do. For instance, if you incentivize media agencies to maximize the value of your media, what they could do is encourage you to spend more on media than you should, because by spending more they're able to achieve greater discount for you. And this is where you have to be careful having different incentives, different KPIs for different agencies. If you're going to have an incentive scheme, have all of the agencies share the same KPIs. And when we put this particular one in place, within 2 or 3 months, the marketers were reporting that all meetings with agencies became much more collaborative, because the start of every meeting was, let's discuss the KPIs we all share and understand what's working and what isn't, so we can maximize the outcomes for the brand and the company. So use appropriate criteria from the marketing team so that you can create alignment. The next is to actually agree the size and funding of the bonus pool. And I think that the mistake people make is making the bonus pool simply a percentage of what could be taken off the agency. I mean, I'd defy anyone participating in this webinar to tell me that you would be happy if your boss came to you and said, I'm going to take 20% of your salary off you, and against this set of criteria, you could earn it back. I mean, I think most of us would want the opportunity of not just earning our 20% back, but possibly earning another 40% on top of it. And I think that's one of the things that we need to do, is to understand what is the size of the pool that we need to offer for it to be an incentive, but also have it linked to what is the financial benefit that's achieved if we achieve this goal. Jason, you ask, if the incentive is shared across multiple agencies, what's the best way to determine how it's distributed? I would assume that you may have read my mind, because I'm actually going to get to that in one or two more slides, so I'll answer that for you. Going back to the size of the pool, you need to know what you can afford to fund, and also that it's big enough that you can actually, it will be an incentive. So let's move on to the next one, which is how to calculate it. And when you've got your agreed criteria, you've got your pool, you calculate the agreed bonus against the performance. So the size of the pool will vary depending on the overall performance. When I talked about the size of the pool, that's the maximum size that will be paid out. The pool will shrink if you underperform. So let's say you put aside $1 million as the overall pool to be shared amongst 4 agencies. That is only if they achieve the stretch objective. If they achieve 50% of the stretch objective, it would shrink from $1 million to $500,000. If you stayed the same as last year, it would shrink to 0, because it's, in this particular case, it would be based on improving the year-on-year position. The thing you have to be careful of, and this is one of the key things that I say to people, is be careful that your cost of doing this is not greater than the benefit that you're going to get out of it. We had a client who called us in because their incentive system wasn't working, and of course it was incredibly complex and difficult, but worst of all, they were paying almost $500,000 in research to purely get the measure that they were going to use to pay the performance, and the performance payment was half of that. So in other words, for a $750,000 spend, $500,000 was just on measuring the performance. So pool size, set the largest pool size and how you're going to fund it, calculate how you perform, and the other thing you have to do is work out how often you're going to pay it as well. Most people do it annually, but I'll get to that in a minute. Now, how is it going to be paid? So once you've got the pool size, the next thing is, how are we going to pay it? And this is the next mistake people make, is that they're inclined to make the bonus as a percentage of the agency's revenue or fee. Now, that just acts as reinforcing the idea that the agency is competing for a share of your budget. Because if you say to an agency, I'm going to bonus you as a percentage of your fee, then they'll try and increase the revenue or fees that they've had paid to them so that they'll increase their bonus. In actual fact, the way this incentive system works is that pool is divided initially equally by each of the parties participating. So if you end up with a $400,000 pool based on performance, and you've got 4 agencies, they're in line to get $100,000 each, irrespective of if you'd paid one agency $1 million in fees or another $100,000 in fees. Now, why would you do that? Your initial feeling would say, oh, that's so unfair, except that they've participated in such a way that they've given up revenue opportunity to actually focus on performance. And the ultimate measure here of a good incentive system is where an agency will make a decision and make a recommendation to you that is actually counter to them maximising their revenue, because they know that the overall benefit is better than their individual desire to maximise their share of your budget. Because you've got to remember, if an agency gets $100,000 in fees, then the profit or margin on that may be only $20,000. But they could be paying for a share of $100,000 that goes straight to profit, which is effectively getting $500,000 in fees. And so the idea of sharing it equally, but in actual fact, it's not completely equal. It starts off as equal. But here's the next trick to having the ultimate incentive scheme. And that is to measure collaboration or cooperation between the agencies, to actually get all of the parties to sit down and realistically provide feedback on how well they all contributed to the overall strategic process and the delivery of the outcomes. And so that's not just the marketer scoring each agency, but it's actually the agencies scoring each other to actually work out how well each of them work together. Now you'd say, why would you do that? Because if you've had one agency try to dominate the process and take control rather than encouraging everyone to participate, then it would come up in this score and their share would be reduced by a percentage of the points that they were given by the other parties. This produces, if you remember the old 50s and 60s American movies like Cool Hand Luke, this gives you your chain gang. You've effectively chained all the agencies together, and they're going to either learn to cooperate and work together to maximise their benefit and yours, or they're going to fight each other and end up with a whole lot of dead bodies they're going to have to carry around. And so you can imagine in the system, if they all wanted to score each other incredibly low, then they're all going to end up just negating each other. But if they're much more honest and focused about who was easy to work with, who collaborated well, who cooperated well, then the people that cooperated well would get an increased share of the overall pool at the expense of those that underperformed. And so it's an internal check to actually also not just encourage them to create increased value and performance, but also to work together in a collaborative way to produce the best possible outcome for the markets. So then the final step is to take the pool that's been calculated on overall performance, separate that 4 ways, then look at collaboration scores to calculate the final agency share and then to actually pay it. Now, as I said before, you may do this once a year, but then you've got to remember that the agencies have actually been working for a year without getting their margin. So you could look at it 6 monthly. And in fact, if you're a publicly listed company and you're reporting quarterly, why wouldn't you do it on a quarterly basis? And especially if you're, say, as services industry like financial services or telco or perhaps airline or travel industry where you're all about acquisition, why wouldn't you make acquisition the number one measure that you're actually monitoring, if not on a daily basis, you're going to monitor it on a weekly, monthly or quarterly basis, and actually reconcile this on a quarterly basis so that the agencies are not waiting 12 months until they get paid. So to me, this is the ultimate incentive system. It's not for everyone, of course. This is not a system that everyone could apply. But if you're really interested in getting the best possible performance from your agencies, then this is the system that we've found to date has the best opportunity for working. Because it's not incentivizing individual agencies, it's incentivizing the most important agencies to actually participate with skin in the game, and it allows you to actually link it to the overall performance of marketing and the business as a way of justifying the additional payment to the agency, whether that's on top of their existing pre-agreed fees or as part of them sacrificing some of their margin or some of their revenue for an opportunity of participating in an even bigger pool funded by them and by the marketer. So that's the approach that we're recommending. Are there any questions? Of course, we're happy to meet with people or have conversations offline if there are specific needs or circumstances that you're interested in. Please feel free to contact us. because we've had quite a lot of experience with this over the last 10 years, and I think we've learnt more from what has failed as we have from what's worked. Which of the original risk-reward models connects best with this incentive system? Jason, thanks for asking that. If I go back to those models, what we've actually found is that having the agencies put some percentage of margin of risk into the pool, and then for the advertiser to fund above and beyond that, is the best model. And the reason for that is by giving something up for the chance to earn more, actually makes the commitment from the agencies greater. What we've found with the first one, the bonus model, is that people are inclined to think, oh, well, that's something nice to have if we get it. But when there's actually some sort of contribution, some skin in the game, then it works better. Having said that, what we've found is if an agency is willing to give up all or most of their revenue for a much bigger upside, such as a fee per lead, so it becomes a cost of sale, then you get a huge commitment then, because all of their upside drives that. That really comes down to the type of business you are. If this is a acquisition, if most of your measurement is around acquisition, and it's a very specific measure, then we've found that the bigger the contribution from both the agency, but also exceeded by the client, works the best. If you're only measuring things that are less specific, let's say like brand desirability or brand health, then the less the link between the agency's ability to contribute to that, the softer the metric, I guess, if we could talk about soft, medium and hard. The more you move away from hard metrics to the medium and soft, then the agencies are less likely to respond to taking a huge risk, because what they're concerned about is if there is no corresponding change, then they're not going to be paid. So look, if your agency is working on a 15 or 20% margin, then they should be considering 10 to 20% as what they're willing to put at risk. But then on the upside, if I was putting, as the agency, I was putting 20% at risk, I'd be looking at earning perhaps on a stretch objective 40 or 50%. Now, it's the old rule that if I'm putting something at risk, I want to make twice as much back. Now, in the aviation industry, if your problem is that you're not filling seats, and there's a cost of not filling seats, then it's worthwhile having a big upside for the agency and actually having a campaign or activity that's directly attributable to that through media and creative, and then rewarding them for actually helping you fill those seats, for example. Likewise with credit cards in banks and financial institutions, you're able to measure attribution to sales or leads, and so have a big upside. If it's a softer measure like brand awareness or brand health or the like, then you'd probably have a much lower risk. So it's about managing risk and reward, and in fact you'll find on the TrinityP3 blog there's a post that's all about balancing risk and reward with incentive and performance-based remuneration. I'd like to say that it's been terrific. We started in August talking about remuneration. We then went on to trust in media and transparency. Production was in September 23rd. Agency rosters and how many you need was October 7th. October 21st was aligning your digital marketing to marketing. We had marketing in a carbon-constrained future. And then today we're talking about supercharging your agencies with incentive-based remuneration. Now the next two links there, all of those presentations are available on SlideShare. So if you go to SlideShare, and you'll be able to find them under Darren Woolley. And if you sign up for SlideShare, you're even able to download those or even take clips of certain pages that you can use. All of these webinars have actually been edited, and they're available to you on our YouTube channel, which is TrinityP3 Videos, and so you can watch through any of those. what we'd really like to do is get some feedback from everyone to see whether this is something we should continue into the new year. So please let us know. Drop me an email or send an email to people@TrinityP3, and we'd be happy if there's a desire in the marketplace for us to continue with these, happy to do so. But otherwise, I hope everyone enjoys a terrific holidays ahead, and we're looking forward to a safe and prosperous 2016. Thank you very much.